Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us here today. I'm going to take it from a little bit different perspective as a governor, former governor, who actually did permitting reform in my state and saw the actual real-world experience of a variety of different agencies that were working on it. I can tell you that when it doesn't go well, we see a lot of really bad consequences. For example, the Army Corps of Engineers took about 6 years to get a permit for the Papio, Missouri Natural Resource District to raise the levees around Offutt Air Force Base. If you're not familiar with Offutt Air Force Base, that's where Strategic Command is located, which controls our nuclear forces. And they got the permit in time to start construction in March of 2019, just when we had a 500-year flood that then did $1 billion of damage to the state. So if they had just gotten the permit done in 4 years, like we were talking the average was, we could have been able to avoid that. But their unnecessary delays caused $1 billion and threatened our national security. So the approach, so we've seen what happens when it can be bad. I can cite other examples where we've had outcomes. And Ms. Goldfuss, I can tell you in my state, when it comes to transmission lines, that frankly, it's U.S. Fish and Wildlife that has been the holdup, not the state. And but I would emphasize that I think the key in all this, which you've been talking about, is early engagement with the community, because I think it actually leads to faster completion times when you engage the community early, because then you don't get all the opposition when you're trying to actually do the siting and get everything else done. So I certainly emphasize that. What I want to emphasize is what we did at the state of Nebraska with regard to Lean Six Sigma. It's a process improvement methodology, whereas you map out the process steps it takes to be able to get a process done. It can be anything. We did it in a number of our agencies. I think we did in 18 different agencies. We had 900 different projects that saved our teammates about 900,000 hours of their time and about $100 million in hard savings. Specifically in our Department of Environment and Energy, we took on our air construction permits. And so we mapped out the process. It was 110 steps long. Only 4 of those steps actually added value. We were able to cut about 88 of those steps, and this is without changing any sort of environmental requirement. We were able to take the process it takes to issue those permits down from roughly about 190 days to, we started that process in 2016, and it got down to about 65 days by the end of 2019. So cut the process time more than half. We had no authority to change any sort of requirement with regard to what companies had to comply with. This is just making the process, streamlining it, and making it easier. So that's one of the things, Chairman, I think that we need to think about as we're talking about permitting reform, is there are ways to do it that have absolutely nothing to do with loosening any sort of restrictions, but just of the process itself to be able to make it better. And we ought to focus on that as we're thinking about permitting reform. So, and actually, not only was it good for the applicants to be able to get those things faster, Yahoo was looking at expanding their data center in the country, or they're looking at the variety of sites, and they actually picked Nebraska to expand it and invested $20 million because of the ease of getting the permit done in a way that allowed them to have that predictability and the certainty you were talking about, Mr. Chairman. So I'll start with you, Ms. Goldfuss. Have you heard of Lean Six Sigma or process improvement methodologies?
I've not heard of the, what was it,
Lean Six Sigma.
Lean Six Sigma, no. But I would like to, I really appreciate the way you laid that out, because one of the success stories was the creation of the Federal Permitting Improvement Council inside the federal government, which is designed to look at where are those bottlenecks and what are the steps, and have a lead agency, if you will, that can engage with the project proponents so they know who are they talking to. It also produced a dashboard that gives you transparency into what those steps are. So I think there is a way to kind of chart this out, and I think with the dollars that were approved in IRA, there's money that can be used for technology and to really help FIPSI and the federal government get some of those efficiencies you're talking about.
Yeah, great. Mr. Timmons, I'm sure you're familiar with Lean Six Sigma, coming from a manufacturing background.
Yes, Governor or Senator, I wanted to point out that
he
governors
has
really
been
do
called
have,
worse. Believe me, he's been called worse.
Much worse.
I always call you Governor too, Mr. Chairman. Governors really do have a unique perspective. I had the opportunity in the 1990s to serve as Chief of Staff to then Governor George Allen of Virginia, and one of the things that he took on was regulatory reform. We modeled our effort after the successful efforts in the state of Delaware, where then Governor Carper had issued an executive order to create a task force to review permitting reform there as well. Governors are leading the way, truly, and your process improvement is one that is cited often for how we can maintain our very strong environmental standards while at the same time improving the process and making it much more efficient.
So you would agree that by looking at things like Lean Six Sigma as part of the solution for permitting, we
Absolutely.
can actually help speed up the time it takes to get the permit without changing any sort of, without losing any sort of regulation with regard to quality and protecting the environment?
Yes, sir. And you also referred to it as process improvements and whatever you call it. If you can streamline the process and you can look at the outcomes and not worry about duplication and overly aggressive processes, you get a lot more done and you get it done better.
Great, thank you. I yield back. So again, getting back to the need to be able to do this, in this committee earlier, previous hearings, we talked about the electric vehicle emission standards and so forth, and the rules that came out that would require 2/3 of all new vehicles by 2032 being electric vehicles. And some of the testimony there was that if you applied that some of the rules that were going to be, say, if you electrified the entire U.S. vehicle fleet, light cars or cars and light trucks and so forth, you're going to be needing, you use up 40% of our current power generation that we're doing today. And for heavy trucks, it would be 10%. So clearly, there's going to be a need for additional power generation. And it does have an impact. I can tell you, Nebraska is the only public power state at 100% public power. And in working, for example, with our officials at the Omaha Public Power District, with the demand they have there with a growing community, and this is not directly related to permitting, but they've had to keep online coal burning plants. They were planning on transitioning over to natural gas plants because of the demand. Because you've got to, if you can't build the demand, then you're going to keep dirtier sources like the coal burning plants. So this is an important thing that we figure out to be able to accomplish the growth of our country and create jobs and that sort of thing. So getting back to what I was talking about with regard to permitting, Ms. Hayes, are you familiar with Lean Six Sigma, or have you heard of process, the process improvement methodologies like that?
I have not heard of that one in particular, no, sir.
Okay, so, but are you familiar with like the idea of process improvement? I mean, would you, I guess where I'm going is, would you agree that looking at the process that was described earlier, that is a potential for us to be able to streamline this process without sacrificing any sort of environmental quality?
There sounds to be merit in that proposal.
Okay, good. That's good enough. I'll take that. Mr. Durbin, I'm going to ask basically the same question. Are you familiar with Lean Six Sigma and process improvement methodologies?
I am, from days representing the chemical industry and DuPont's use of Six Sigma.
Okay, okay, great. So you are familiar with it. Do you think that this should be part of our solution that we're looking at when we're looking at how can we streamline the process to turn these permits around faster without sacrificing environmental quality?
I think there are huge opportunities to use that type of process improvement strategy to find where are the challenges. I mean, Ms. Goldfuss mentioned earlier the FIPSI and Fast 41, which has created some improvements by having a dashboard and streamlining the process. By the way, I should note that the Fast 41 and one federal decision that created FIPSI was actually a proposal that was put out there by the U.S. Chamber and NRDC. So there's hope. There's hope that we can make progress here on this issue.
That is right.
Very good, very good. Okay, so Mr. Timmons, could you talk to me a little bit about what are some of the challenges your members face with the current, maybe you can elaborate, I know you mentioned it before, but can you elaborate a little bit what some of the challenges your members face when they have running to these permit processes that are taking longer than they expect? What kind of impact does it have on creating jobs for American workers?
Well, any type of uncertainty leads to, frankly, investment. People have to figure out where they're going to put their investments. And I think the thing that is most concerning to those of us who represent manufacturers, pardon me, in America is when the demand for a product increases, there has to be an investment made somewhere to create the supply to meet that demand. We want that done here in the United States. Oftentimes in other countries, permitting processes are more expeditious, not necessarily better, by the way. So if a manufacturer has to make an investment decision, sometimes those decisions either can get delayed if the facility is going to be made here, or that investment can be made offshore, and we just simply don't want to see that. We've, as I noted earlier, during the pandemic, we saw pretty stark situations where much of our, for instance, our personal protective equipment was not being made here in the United States. If we have a commitment to doing that here in the United States, then we need to get that done now. We have to move those projects along. The projects that were part of the infrastructure funding, the CHIPS and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, all of those projects have such potential here in this country, but they're not going to get done anytime soon if we can't move the permitting process along. That means jobs. That means lost opportunities in terms of jobs and wages and strengthening communities. That's why we're pushing for this reform.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Timmons.